60 years on from the outbreak of the Second World War, BBC Two now continues a special evening of distinctive documentaries and films from the History Zone with Kirsty Wark.
As part of the campaign to bomb us into submission, the Germans aimed to destroy the nation's historic treasures. Dan Cruickshank reveals the lengths to which Britain went to protect its art.
If the government's plans to protect Britain and its people from attack 60 years ago were pretty feeble, surprisingly, its plans to protect the nation's works of art were well advanced when war broke out in September 1939. Amazingly, some museums have been hatching plans to evacuate their treasures since the early 1930s. In fact, when war clouds loomed in 1938, the National Gallery was so well prepared that it began evacuating its paintings, only to be turned back halfway when Neville Chamberlain returned from peace talks with Hitler. Finally, on the 23rd of August 1939, the government ordered Britain's art to be evacuated. From the outset, the government made it clear to the nation's museums and art galleries they couldn't evacuate everything. So the first problem they faced was what to move and what to leave behind. How on earth could they decide? The galleries were instructed that the most valuable works should go, but some were too heavy and robust and were left in place to take their chances against enemy bombs. By 1939, 30 safe havens had been selected to house the nation's greatest collections, but just transporting the art across the country was a major security headache. The worry was that the art would be stolen, sabotaged, or even captured by Hitler as a major propaganda coup. One top-secret destination for Britain's best-known paintings was Muncaster Castle on the remote west coast of Cumbria, far from the enemy flight paths. In late August 1939, the household staff were told to prepare the house for a trainload of evacuees. On the appointed date, the staff were called to the Great Hall, expecting to find a motley crowd of women and children. Instead, they found a gaggle of policemen and officials from the Tate, surrounded by great crates of paintings. These were the evacuees they'd been told to prepare for. The crates arrived at Muncaster Castle, containing some of the Tate Gallery's most precious paintings, including works by Rossetti, Turner, and Blake.
Well, the castle truck went down and picked them up off the train, and a number of us were just mustered to go down and help the driver and whoever was with them to put them onto the truck. We manhandled the crates in, and then that was it. Once we didn't open them, that was left for the Tate men to do in their own time.
And they simply, what, stacked down here?
Yes, it was cluttered with them, actually, yeah.
From the very start of the operation, the government was unwilling to assign police protection to the evacuated art, so each gallery had to get by with its own makeshift security. Up here, the Tate had 6 men patrolling day and night, armed, presumably, with nothing more sinister or dangerous than a broomstick. But it was not only the great country houses that were used. All over Britain, buildings from universities to hospitals and prisons were requisitioned for use as storage depots. The more remote, the better. So Aberystwyth on the west coast of Wales was perfectly placed. Here, at the National Library of Wales, museums from all over Britain, including the British Museum and the National Gallery, were given space to store their treasures.
It was a very busy institution because we had so many deposits, museums, ministries and individuals.
How were the paintings guarded? Were there people with guns or whatever?
Oh, it's very strict. There were night watchmen patrolling the building at night. Senior member of the British Museum staff slept in the library the whole period, and a member of the library staff on the room below. And of course, There were passwords at night and passes for everybody entering the building during the day.
But as the war progressed, many areas which had seemed remote and safe in 1939 had, by 1940, become vulnerable to enemy action as well. Now provincial cities were being bombed, and the safe havens which held the nation's treasures found themselves under the flight path of enemy bombers. Britain's art was at risk again. In early June 1940, when a German invasion looked imminent indeed, there was talk of evacuating Britain's art to Canada for safekeeping. Churchill was dead against the idea. It would look like Britain was admitting defeat, and that would have been catastrophic for the public's morale. Art had suddenly become a politically potent subject. Winston Churchill demanded that instead of just sending the art away, it should be hidden deep underground. Who on earth would have thought that Britain's most valuable, most fragile works of art would be stored in wet and windswept countryside like this in North Wales? The National Gallery's plans for hiding its most precious paintings deep in the Manod slate quarries was meant to be a closely guarded secret. But it was an operation fraught with problems, and to the children of the nearby village of Festiniog, the arrival of the art was a memorable sight.
I remember the pictures coming through. The main one was King Charles I or something, or something like that anyway, and it wouldn't go under the bridge. But I remember them jacking the back end of the wagon up and putting planks like that, so that the wheels came on, and then just slid them in stages so they would be lined up.
Did you know they were paintings that were being delivered?
Yes, because most of us had families or fathers or working in the quarries, and they were preparing a quarry. So the original story was that the crown jewels were coming. But no, they wouldn't lower the bridge for that. Even the 6-year-old, as I was then, would realise that the crown jewels weren't that big anyway.
When the paintings at last navigated the precarious mountain roads, they were stored in their final resting place in the heart of the mountain. Today, the caverns are almost completely forgotten. We're driving into the hillside with about 200 feet of slate above us, cut before the war by chaps winning slate from the bowels of the earth here. Strange industrial debris left around. It's like a derelict fairyland, really. Clearly we're now penetrating into the more secret parts of this amazing world, a place where Rubens, Van Dyck would have gone before us. Now, this is amazing. A huge grotto of the most picturesque sort. Oh. This was clearly the nerve centre of the place. Buildings over there, plant rooms, security rooms. It took nearly a year to prepare the caverns that would house the art. Finally, on August the 12th, 1941, the paintings arrived, including Van Dyck's enormous portrait of Charles I. Everything about the buildings was designed to protect the paintings, and in fact the conditions were so good that after Sir Kenneth Clarke, director of the National Gallery, inspected the paintings in the quarry, he was so impressed that he asked for a similar air conditioning system to be installed back in London. But of course, being underground had its risks. We can see here one of the great problems of this place. The ceiling has come down, the great lumps of slate have collapsed. That, of course, is what the museums are worried about. They knew that was possible down here. But at least, with this amount of slate above them, the paintings were safe from enemy bombs. If Hitler had won the war, what would have happened to all this art? Well, one thing's for sure, it wouldn't have gone back to the museums and galleries. Hitler had quite a different plan for it. Blenheim Palace, one of Britain's monuments to military might, a fact not lost on Nazi leaders. This is where some of the best of Britain's art collections could have ended up. The Nazi leaders are reputed to have earmarked this magnificent palace as their British headquarters. So this is where Hitler would have stayed, surrounded by our art treasures. Thankfully, it never happened.
We continue tonight's History Zone, marking the 60th anniversary of the declaration of war with the film Bridge on the River Kwai, starring Alec Guinness.